One of our viewers recently said they did a high alcohol versus low alcohol test in mead, and we thought,
let's put it to a test.
So we're gonna do our own version of it. Really simple. We're gonna make 2 meads, half-gallon batches, because, you know, what if we don't like it? Actually, it's because we make a lot of mead around here. We make a lot of wine around here, and we just don't need to have 2 gallons of this for a test. Half-gallon will do. So, first thing we need, because this is a mead, is honey.
Honey.
And for this, we're just gonna use a basic Kirkland Wildflower Honey. What I'm gonna do though, is one is going to have 1.25 pounds, the other one's going to have 0.75 pounds, which equates to around 7% ABV finished and 12% ABV finished. So we'll see what kind of difference it actually makes. So let's measure out 1.25 pounds, which would be 1 pound, 4 ounces. Okay, so that's 1 pound, 4 ounces. And now we're looking for 0.75 pounds, which would be 12 ounces. Okay, from this point forward, we're gonna be referring to them as low ABV and high ABV, or low and high for short. Something I wanna do though, is I kinda wanna notate a spot on each jar where we're gonna fill to, because if I put the same amount of water in each, we're gonna have different volumes. So I wanna have roughly, well, exactly the same amount in each one. So what I'm gonna do is just use something to measure.
We could just mark one and then put the other one next to it and then just...
This is so much more interesting though.
Okay.
Just putting a little mark so I know where to put the water to, that's all. It's an arbitrary spot, but it makes sense.
And now you would need to rate high and low.
Oh, you want me to write right on the jars?
Yeah.
Okay. High.
Hi. Give her a little smiley face.
There we go. High. Low. He has a frowny face.
Oh, he's sad.
Alrighty.
All right.
You didn't think I was really gonna do it, did you?
I didn't think you were gonna do it. Normally he's not up for my shenanigans, but today,
All right.
apparently today he is.
Now I want to mix this up a little bit, so we need some water.
All right, you don't want to do the additives? You just want to do
No, I want to do some water first.
Partial water?
Yeah, we're just gonna get this sort of mixed, just halfway or so. And I'm gonna use the spattle. It's a spoon, it's a paddle, it's both. Get yours, link in the description. I'm gonna use the spoon side today. It'll probably mix a lot easier. I think the paddle part might be too big for this. I'm being a little sloppy, so we get a little aeration in there. The idea here is we're trying to make them as equal as possible, other than the honey ingredient, and that's it.
And this is an important thing that I'm going to talk about now, because we've had many comments say, I use this percentage alcohol tolerance yeast, so that's the alcohol I'm going to get. And I'm sorry, but that's not how things work. They need to have sugars to consume in order to make that alcohol. So if you just put like a teaspoon of fermentable sugars in an 18% yeast, you're not going to get 18% ABV regardless of what that packet tells you. So did that make any sense to what we're doing right now?
No, had nothing to do with what we're doing right now.
So,
but it's okay. It's a good life lesson all around.
So we're going to be using the same yeast in both of these. So because this has less sugar, fermentable sugar, aka honey, in it than this one, then the yeast, regardless of their tolerance, is only going to be able to ferment what's available to them.
Exactly. Okay, low is mixed. Time to work on high. A little harder to mix high.
Go figure.
Now, one thing you'll see right away is there's a difference in color. The high should be darker because of more honey. Now, there's probably going to be a fermentation time difference. I would say high is going to take a little longer than low, but not by a lot, probably a few days maybe. I mean, I'm not really gonna track that so much. We're gonna show them when they're done. I'm not gonna really worry about it. The idea is, do they taste different?
Yes.
And how do they taste different? Because I have some guesses, okay? But I'm gonna reserve those until we get closer to the actual tasting part. Gotta keep you in suspense, so you watch all the way to the end. Because we wanna make sure that this works very, very well, and we want a very neutral experience from the flavors on these, we're gonna be adding a little bit of wine tannin, because that's pretty normal to do. And I'm just gonna do 1/4 teaspoon in each. Now, could I use black tea? Sure, the problem is tea is biological, any slight difference could make it different, so the wine tannin should be pretty consistent across the board, and I'm just rounding off the 1/4 teaspoon the same way, so it's a slightly rounded quarter teaspoon. But it'll be 2 slightly rounded quarter teaspoons, 1 in each. Therefore, the same, like that. And a little bit of nutrient into this. We're going to be using North Mountain Supply Fermaid O. That was North Mountain Supply Wine Tannin too, by the way. Just get the tannin off the spoon. All right. And I'm just going to do a quarter teaspoon of Fermaid O in each as well. I'm only going to be doing a simple addition. I'm just preloading. I'm not going to do it at the sugar breaks or anything like that. We're going to keep it simple. Now I'm just going to mix these up a little.
Do you want more water?
Not quite yet.
Okay.
It's easier to mix it when there's less water.
So you're being aggressive?
I can be aggressive without spilling it everywhere.
Without needing a poncho?
Without wearing it, yeah. Fermaid O and Wine Tannin both break up in the liquid eventually, and it's fine.
They're gloopy.
Yeah, they're just gloopy. We are going to take readings on these two eventually. We'll get to it. This will probably be a fairly decent tasting mead, a very simple mead, but it'll probably be a decent tasting mead. I expect them both to be very dry, and that's kind of the point. Sweetness covers up a lot, so we don't want to add sweetness into the mix and mess that up. All right. Water! Now is when we start looking at fill lines. You want me to do the fill line part?
Well,
because you can't see them.
You want to stir more since you got gloops, or you want to?
I'm going to let the gloops deal with themselves.
The gloop will gloop.
The gloop will ungloop on its own.
All right.
So I'm going to fill these to the fill lines that I've marked previously. That's the whole point, is to have equal amounts in both. Pardon my reach. And right to there. Okay. Now, the first thing I'm thinking is I really hope these aren't super aggressive fermentations, because
it's going to be messy.
Okay. Next, I want to take readings on both of these.
Stir.
Stir. If you don't stir it first, you won't get an accurate reading. I'm going to try to avoid the clumps and gloops and glops. It's good. It's good. It's good. Let me in there. All right. While she mixes that one, I'm going to take a reading. It's usually helpful to have your hydrometer in the tube. All right. So high, 1.102. Every drop is sacred. Okay, maybe not every drop. Come on. And low, probably a little higher than I expected as well. 1.064. Okay, so potentials on these. Rough idea potentials on these. 1.064 can be somewhere around like 7 to 8%, and 1.102 is right around 13.5 or so. So that gives us a pretty good range for both of these. To have some distance between them so that we really get a decent test. And we've given them nutrients, we've given them tannins, now we need to give them some yeast. And for that, we're going to be using EC1118. Why EC1118? Well, because I got a partial packet, first off, and because I know it'll chew through just about anything. That's what people tell me anyway. By the way, don't bang metal spoons on your hydrometer. It's probably not a good idea. I didn't break it. I'm going to do a quarter teaspoon of yeast in each. That's about the right amount of yeast. But that way, they each have the same amount of yeast, too. Even though yeast doesn't determine ABV, it could determine effectiveness.
Isn't it typically a full teaspoon per gallon? So wouldn't it be a half a teaspoon?
I think we have plenty.
Okay.
There's actually charts and stuff online and how much to use, but a whole packet does 5 gallons, so I'm not overly concerned. And we're just going to stick lids on them.
With airlocks.
With airlocks. This one's just a little bit loose. But I think it still makes a seal. Yeah, there's still a good seal there. Okay. And what are we going to do with them now?
We're going to let them sit. But we're going to let them sit on a cookie tray with edges, just in case they get active and foam over. It'll be caught in the cookie tray rather than all over our kitchen.
And we'll see when these airlocks slow down to almost nothing and show you the next step. All right, so after 3 weeks, we have some very definitive differences between these two already. As you can see, the one on the left, my left, is actually the high one, and that is quite cloudy compared to the one on the right, which is actually the low, which is pretty much completely clear. Now, in looking at them, if I look really hard, I can see a bubble or two still coming up the side of the high one. The low one, it looks done. We have different airlocks on these because the airlock we initially used didn't hold.
You can totally see bubbles coming up through.
Oh yeah, I didn't even notice it until you just pointed that out. Okay,
Yeah.
there's little tiny bubbles coming.
Tiny bubbles.
I think they could both be degassing, but the fact that this didn't clear says something too. A lot of the time, once things are finished fermenting, they will start to clear on their own. But you know what? There's only one way to find out.
You gotta take a reading.
But as always, when you open something up like this, you want to look. Is there mold? Is there growth? Is there eyeballs winking at you when you open it up? I see some where the foam was there, the croissant line on the side. Doesn't look real appetizing, but it's not dangerous. There's no mold.
Normal.
Does not smell off. Yeah, it smells, like a dry mead normally smells. Get a quick little sample. Yeah, it's very cloudy though. You can see that. And it's not actually finished yet. It's at 1.014.
So the visual clues are now reflected in our measurements. So it tells us we're on the right page, that we just need to wait longer.
Right. So what I am going to do though is this is taking a while. And I mean, we put Wine Tannin, Fermaid O, and we used EC1118 yeast in this. It should be done. So what I want to do is I'm going to dump this back in carefully so as to not cause extra oxygen to get in there, but it's degassing, so it's not a big deal. And I'm going to stir this up.
Also, because it is a small volume, just by pouring it in there, he got some of the bottom lees to come back into suspension. And the reason why that's important this time is that process alone, plus the degassing, may help the yeast to continue fermentation. May help the yeast continue fermentation.
Yeah, it's probably stalled, but not necessarily, because I think I still saw some airlock activity now and then. So it's just taking a while.
I think it just got kind of tired.
Everybody brags about EC1118. We have not had that experience. And I don't know if it's just our environment is so much warmer. Some people that like it, that have it a little cooler, maybe EC1118 works better. That's why I always say, your yeast choice really depends on your environment as much as what you're making and all those kind of things. There's a lot of factors that go into yeast choice. And that's why we tend to use the same ones over and over, because they work really well for our environment. And we just determine which one based off of the flavor profile we're going after.
All right, I'm going to sanitize this.
Oh, yeah, got to sanitize everything all over again. Make a proper and true test. I'm going to put the lid back on. Yeah, it's already letting out bubbles. So either it's degassing or still going. All right, time to check low. I'm betting you low's done. Again, with the inspection.
It has a little bit of the croissant line, but not as much as the high one did.
It is a milder smell, which that's important to note, but it's also
expected.
Beautifully clear. I mean, that's perfect clarity. So this is something that happens all the time. People are always like, oh, my meat isn't clear. Well, maybe it's not done, or maybe you just haven't let it sit long enough, because there's other things that'll happen too. That this isn't something we talk about a lot. I've touched on it a time or two here or there. There's a thing called diacetyl that is produced by yeast during fermentation, and it sits in your brew. It'll sit there in the lees and whatever. If you leave it on the lees for a couple of weeks, usually, the yeast actually clean up after themselves. They get rid of the diacetyl and it's gone. So if you rack too soon and then you try to clear it, you may have some off weird flavors because you didn't get rid of the diacetyl. See? Leave it. No rush.
All right, where we're at on this one?
I'm working on it. This one I'm going to say is done. It's at 0.990. So it made a little more alcohol than I expected it to, but it's done. But I don't care, because I'm going to pour this sample back in. We're not...
Just be really gentle with that if you can.
Why?
Just because we don't need to mess this up.
Yeah, that's true. It's going to sit while the other one finishes anyway. It doesn't matter. You can be as gentle as you want in a small container.
That's true.
Whatever.
Or just do that.
Once it's cloudy, it's cloudy. What difference does it make?
Extra cloudy.
But this will clear out again. It's just all going to fall back out of suspension. I don't think it's going to ferment any further. But this is not finished yet. We're not ready for a comparison yet. Even though now they look the same.
So back to the fermentation they go. And we'll see you in about a week or so.
Yeah. All right, so it's been a couple weeks. You know, it's been like 3 weeks or so, but it's been about 5 weeks since this whole thing started. And one thing I would like to point out right away, let me put some light behind these so you can see it. There is a distinct difference in them when you look at that. That is the high one, and that's the low one. You can see how much clearer the low one actually became. They're both what I would call cleared at this point. I think the high one could use a little more time to clear, but you know what? We're just going to go forward and check this out. Because to me, this is kind of a simple test, but you know, it's worth doing. Of course, we want to look to see that there's no, you know, mold or anything in there. Smell it. It smells like mead. And I'm going to take its final reading, so that way we can calculate the ABV so that we know what we're talking about here. But as you can see in the cylinder, it's pretty clear. When we last visited this one, it was at 1.014. I believe it's gone quite a bit further now, 1.000, which is pretty much where we wanted it to go. Now comes the tricky bit. I'm going to pour some into a glass. So we're going to taste these, you know? Oh, look at that. The glass holds all of it. So high is on that side.
All right, so we need to put this back on there.
We need to rinse that out.
To cleanse our equipment.
Okay, everything's been cleaned off again. That way we don't have any cross-contamination between the two test subjects. And again, look at this one. Last we looked at it, it was all good, so I didn't expect anything untoward. It was at 990.
Do you want to put the hydrometer in your
I want to put the hydrometer in the cylinder first. It just makes it easier. So this was at 0.990 last we looked at it, and it's very, very clear. Not surprising, there was less to ferment, so it took less time and it had more time to clear. It actually went drier than the other one, which is a little surprising and may alter the flavors. I really didn't need that last couple drops in there. 990, yeah. 0.990. All right, so let me just take this back out and pour our sample in here. Now, if we want, we can push these out of the way.
I'm going to just clear the set.
Yes. Is that out of your way? Yes, it is. Okay. Okay, first, I want to show you a side-by-side using the other camera through the light to see what these look like, to see their real, you know, differences. All right, so looking at these, the one on the left is the higher alcohol, the one on the right is the lower alcohol. And as you can see, there's a little bit of a difference in the clarity and color on them. Not a lot, just a little bit.
It's time for math. So the math is basically we're taking our original specific gravity reading and we're subtracting our final specific gravity reading, and then we're taking that number and multiplying it by our coefficient of choice, which is 135
for both of these, actually. So I'm using the calculator teacher said I would never have handy. It was in my pocket. For the high one, it's 1.102, and it ended at 1.000. So 1.102 minus 1.000 gives us 102 points used times 135, makes it 13.77. I'm actually going to write down the 13.77 this time. I don't normally worry about that specific kind of numbers, but for this it makes sense if I have enough room on my paper here. There we go. And then the other one, the low one, was 1.064 minus 0.990 gives us 74 points used times 135. That one's 9.99%. So they didn't have as much disparity between them as I had hoped they would. I was really hoping for more like 7 to 8 and say 12, but 10 and almost 14. Okay, they're four ABV away from each other, so that's all right.
My takeaway from this is something that I've noticed in our particular environment with these particular yeast strains. Our high ABV yeast choice was EC1118.
We used it for both. We used the same yeast on both.
Oh, we did?
Yeah, we used the same yeast. The only difference is the amount of fermentables.
Well, that is very curious then.
Isn't it? EC1118 doesn't usually do that well for us.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
we usually have a little more trouble with it.
That was going to be my point. But it's interesting that it was more happy with the lower amount of fermentable sugars.
Yeah.
It powered
which
through.
shows everything we need to know about how yeast work. When you really think about it, I mean, some people are going to hate this kind of statement, but this is true. We did use some Fermaid O in both of these. We used a quarter teaspoon in each, which is the recommended amount, but the higher one struggled more than the lower one. And that's something that I've said for years. The higher you go in original gravity, the harder the yeast have to work. Not just taking longer. I mean, it stresses them a little bit, as evidenced by not clear. Went to only 1.000 and took 2 weeks longer to get there. Went to 990 and did it super fast. So that tells you something. That's why when people always say, oh, how can I make it higher ABV? Well, you can by adding more honey up front or more sugar up front. But every time you do that, you're making it harder on the yeast and you're increasing the likelihood of a stall.
Yep.
This is an 18% yeast. It is known as champagne yeast. It is known as just rips through everything. In our environment, for whatever reason, it doesn't seem to do that.
And as you can see by the numbers and the scenario here, these were literally side by side in our fermentation. It had no problem continuing the fermentation process and going below the specific gravity of water in the lower ABV and the lower fermentable sugar version. But it didn't continue fermenting in the higher fermentable sugar version. So I hope that alone, regardless of what comes out,
that's a nice
from
result
taste,
to know about.
Will help you understand more about the fermentation process, and that just dumping as much fermentable sugar into a bucket as possible really isn't
it's not a wise move.
the best way to go.
In this case, we started at 1.102, which is about my maximum. I like to be just 1.100 or below. It's 2 points over. I'm not going to cry over that. But this is about the high point of what I would do, even with an 18% yeast, unless I was step feeding. That's different. If I was step feeding, then I might worry about more.
But I think even with step feeding, going with lower increments is probably going to make
it stresses the yeast less because they adjust. They adjust to it.
Yeah.
All right, time for smelling and tasting and stuff. I'm going to say off the bat, the smell is relatively similar. It's a little stronger on high than it is on low. I get a stronger smell.
What honey did we use?
This is, doesn't say.
Just honey.
Just honey. It's probably Kirkland honey, I would imagine. I can check. I'll put a note right here. They're very similar on smell.
Yeah.
I don't think there's much between them.
It seems pretty much identical.
I would say that the high one has a slightly stronger, but it's not a different smell. It's just there's more smell.
I'm just getting a more vegetal note than I was anticipating on this particular mead. That's why I asked what honey we used. To me,
vegetal?
It smells slightly vegetal. And it could just be because my allergies are going crazy.
Oh, I'm going to taste it.
So don't trust this nose today.
It's actually kind of nice. It's young, and I can tell that it's young. It's only about 5 weeks old. It tastes sweeter than 1.000 would suggest, which I think our taste buds are adjusting. Our diet is changing. We're using a lot less sugar. I think that could be a factor. I'm not rinsing out my mouth, and this is not, by far, not a scientific definitive test. We're just literally tasting these two side by side to see what kind of difference is there in 4% different ABV. Oh, that's significantly different. Significant difference. That is almost like watery and thin. This is rich. Now, that's 10 points of final gravity, too. There's more sugars in this than there is in that. That's just the way it is. They're two different beverages.
And there's wine tannins in both of these.
Yep, there's a little bit of wine tannin in both.
At the very end, I'm getting some of the tannin situation in the lighter ABV. But flavor, complexity, profile,
the higher alcohol, by far.
The higher alcohol one. And I think a lot of it has to do with the sugars that remained.
Yeah, that might be skewing the flavors here. Makes me wonder, should we add some honey to raise that to 1.000? Would that would, well, we could do that at the end. Maybe we'll try that just to see. But right off the bat, that's the difference right there. The one with a little bit more alcohol and more sugars is way more complex. I'm getting fruity notes and floral notes that aren't present in this at all.
And I attribute that more to the residual sugars than I do to the ABV. Now, I know in sampling whiskey, particularly brands where their lower ABV varietals are simply literally watered down versions of their higher strength, and comparing them side by side,
they can still taste drastically different.
They taste drastically different. And so, yes, shocker.
You know what? Let's do that. We're at that point. Let me put a little bit of honey in there, and we'll mix it through. What?
Alcohol does play a role in flavor.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, there's 4% difference between these two. A higher ABV one tastes better. It just does. Let me put a little bit of honey in that, though, and we'll mix that through and see what happens. I'm not going to measure this or anything. I'm just going to put in a couple of drops of honey just to simulate a little bit more sweetness to this.
So this is not scientific.
It never was.
Warning.
Nothing about
this method.
That's it. That's my perfectly dosed amount.
Right, but I mean, you can't even measure that because of this quantity. So.
Yeah. That wasn't the point. It was just to do it.
Okay.
Okay, I mean, we all know that there's a difference, but, you know, I've never actually tasted the same recipe 10% and 14% side by side before.
Yeah.
So I thought that was kind of a neat concept. And it's amazing how different they are. And I'm trying to negate the one variable, which is the amount of sugars left. I think I got it close. But there's still a huge difference. Drastically different. They're miles apart. I would not believe they were the same recipe. As far as like the same ingredients, the same honey, the same yeast, the same everything. Yeah. So totally different.
Wow.
Now, it might not be quite as sweet. Let's add a little bit more. And you might be thinking, guys, what are you doing?
We don't know.
This is called experimentation and trial and error. We're looking to see, like, what is the real difference here? Like, if I add sweetness to this, do they ever hit a point where they taste the same? And I don't think they're going to.
Basically, this is the scientific method. And somebody's going to say, no, it's not. Let me explain, shall I? Give me a moment. When you do the scientific method, you're going to propose a theory, a concept, an idea.
Hypothesis.
And then you are going to test that to see if that is true, if it's false, if it's unconclusive. We have sort of an inconclusive situation going on here because our fermentable sugar range did not equate in these. If we both
the
came
final
out
end result
to the same specific gravity, then we wouldn't have to be messing around because we would know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if they were both 1.000 or both 990, we'd be fine.
Right. So now that's a variable that we weren't considering, we weren't anticipating. And so we're trying to negate that variable to see if our hypothesis is true.
They're a lot more similar now. There was floral notes and honey notes coming through on the high that were just not present in the low at all. And I think I may have actually added just the right amount of honey to bring those notes back forward. They're remarkably similar now. I did not expect that to happen. Just a teaspoon of honey, a half a tablespoon of honey.
That is super interesting, and that helps us now determine our initial proposal our question was, does ABV change the flavor? And now that
they even smell the same now.
Now that we're guessing, because we have such a small sample size, we can't really actually test it numerically to see
Getting smaller by the minute too.
If it's the same. But we're guessing that our fermentable sugar level is more equal than it was before.
They're much closer if they're not the same.
So flavor-wise, for me, they are pretty darn similar.
They're 90% the same.
The thing that is different still for me, and I think will remain different, is the textural feeling, the sensation in the mouth.
See, I actually got them where they're
still
similar mouthfeel.
Feeling more...
A little more.
going on with the higher ABV, which could simply be my nerves reacting to alcohol, because that's a thing, right?
Okay.
Where this feels texturally more watery than this one does.
Well, let me taste again. Science.
I'm trying to be very careful with my verbiage because I know some people are going to be triggered and want to.
Okay. This one tastes like a fully formed mead. This one tastes like a mead that's been sweetened.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which, that is another interesting concept. We've been asked many times, is it better to ferment something and have it be a little bit sweet at the end, or to go dry and then back sweeten? Is there a difference? And my theory has always been there should be no difference because it's still sugars at the end. But this is starting to make me change my mind.
Right. But we also believe, again, this theory has not been tested, that after an extended amount of time, it should even out. And basically, aging should round out those differences and make them be more similar.
Okay, so do we need to bottle those two and keep them for a year and revisit this test?
Well, we would have to sweeten the lower ABV to
But
be
if
the
we
same
sweeten and then
gravity.
pasteurize, now we've changed the test. So
Right.
I would rather
So-
sweeten at the time that we taste it again, just like we just did.
That's not my statement.
Oh, because then the mellowing wouldn't happen.
Right.
That's right.
Right.
We could pasteurize both,
We could pasteurize both.
just to make it even,
Sure.
if we decided that we want to go that far. I don't know that that's even necessary, though. Will it really make that much difference in the end? That's a whole other test, though.
Right. But let's.
You know what? Let us know in the comments below if you want us to do that.
Right.
If you want us to take a bottle of each of these and sweeten the one to match, like we can actually test it, sweeten it enough to match, and then pasteurize both, save them for a year, and see if the aging process actually makes them taste much the
Yeah,
same.
we'll put those to the side and wait on your response.
Yeah.
But I want to conclude this specific test. For me, based on the variables that we were presented that were unanticipated, the question of does ABV change the taste, I would say in this particular instance, once we did the adjustments, the taste as in the flavor, no.
Well,
But the taste, as in the sensation, yes.
I would say it did change it. I just did another quick sip, and I can taste a little bit more of an edge to this one that I don't get on this one.
Okay.
And that's a 4% ABV difference. Yeah, you could probably detect that. And I am detecting it. I'm
Okay.
definitely getting a little bit more of an alcohol edge to this one than from this one. So
Right.
it's minor. And I really would have liked it if it was like 15% and 6%, because then we'd
still
have.
some left, okay.
Oh yeah, there's still some left. Go ahead and do it. And you'll see what I mean. The flavors are similar. There's a feel to it. Like the edge and the smoothness of the high one is actually different than the low one. Feels complete. This one feels like it needs some time. It's kind of interesting. The raw honey mixed in just doesn't really work the same. It needs to sit in there for a while. It needs to mellow. I think the 1 year test might actually be a thing. But let us know if you want us to do it. If you don't want us to do it, say, yeah, nah, I don't care.
All right. After I did my ridiculous belabored whiskey chew, I do see what you're
There is a
referring to.
definite edge in here. And that edge is the best word I got for it, because it's the ethanol coming through. Ethanol can be a sweetened flavor. It can be a bitter flavor.
Yeah, I think if we had a more extreme difference between the ABVs, it
would be more obvious.
More obvious,
Yeah.
yeah. But doing the swirl whiskey chew thing, I was
Yeah.
able to determine.
I think this was a neat test, though. It showed a few different things. I think that's really, really cool. And we love doing stuff like this, by the way. So if you have more ideas for tests like this that you'd like to see us do,
Yeah.
feel free, leave it in the comments. And if it's something that we can work
Right.
with, we'll try to do it.
Just take into consideration we are not going to be doing 5-gallon tests.
Yeah, we're not going to be making doing
half-gallon
tests of 20 and 30 gallons.
And we're
of
not
stuff.
going to do 30 different versions. 'cause
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
just
Gotta be somewhat practical. We don't drink as much as people think we do. We don't have as much space to store things, and we make 50 to 52 new recipes every year already. So keep that in mind when you're making your suggestions. If we can scale it down to
So thank you
small sizes,
for keeping that in
we'll
mind.
totally look into things like
Absolutely. So question number 1, do you want us to continue this particular test?
Right.
And question number 2, is there another completely different test you'd like to see us do?
that. And as always, guys, thanks so much for watching, and have a great day.
Bye-bye.